Blessings, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Dane, your host. I hope you're doing well wherever you may find yourselves. And welcome to my very first reaction video. Here I will be reacting to Classic Rock's article, and it's online as well, entitled The Greatest 50 Rock Bands of All Time, although that's a bit of a misnomer because there's some artists in there, singer-songwriter type, or we wouldn't call them a band because the group, if you will, is just the person's name. You know, think Cher, that kind of thing. But Cher's not in it, thank God. So there are 50. And in this video, not only am I going to react to whether I think the band or artist goes in there or doesn't, I'm also going to substitute the ones that I think. Now, I will not rank them because that may be a different video. I have a video already of my top favorite 10 bands of all time that has not changed. But we'll see if I will do my own 50. I'm not going to take a band out or artist and say, okay, this is where this band goes because this band isn't good enough to be in the top 50. I'm just going to, after I go through the 50 bands and talk about which ones are the ones I would agree with and which ones I disagree, then I would give you my list of the ones that need to go in there somewhere. Somewhere is the key. Because again, I'm not ranking them. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Number 50 is Roxy Music. And this is definitely one I shake my head at. And remember, this is all completely subjective, of course. I like Roxy. Let me try again. I like Roxy Music, but I definitely, in my humble opinion, don't think they go in the top 50. I'm not sure if I would put them in a top 100, maybe somewhere in the top 500. And I would say somewhere in between 400 and 500, but that's just me. Some of it is just way too commercial, especially when you get to Avalon. But even before that, the second album, I remember getting that and going, where is the cool stuff from the first album kind of thing. So, and there were some really cool gems in their discography spread out, but there's nothing like that first album. I don't think that they garnish, if that's the right word, I don't think they earn the spot of number 50. To me, they shouldn't be there at all. The next one I agree with, but I'm not sure if I would put it so low. The next one is King Crimson, and as you know, if you watch this channel, I'm a huge King Crimson fan. What a great debut album. The second album, In the Wake of Poseidon, is very much like the first, riding the coattails, riding the wave, pun intended, of that first album. Very similar. You have Greg Lake on vocals. I do love the Islands album. It's very jazzy, and there's some Beatlesque moments. Ladies of the Road comes to mind. Circus is not my favorite album, but over the years, I've very much grown to love it. There's some stuff on there that isn't really my cup of tea, but overall, it is a very good album. So King Crimson, thumbs up. Next is ZZ Top. I think ZZ Top goes in the top 100 or 200, but I would not put them in at number 48, especially because there's just so much wanderings into the pop realm in the 80s, late 80s. They come back to that more bluesy style, but I just think the real reason, I guess, or the main reason rather, ZZ Top doesn't belong in the top 50 to my ears is because while they are a great band, there are much better bands that deserve to be in the top 50, in this case, slot 48. Next is the Ramones at 47. I'm not a punk fan, and once you get past the fourth album, everything really starts to sound the same. To me, they're not what defines punk. Punk, I know, is an attitude, but punk is also a genre, and there's just too much. It's kind of like party music on steroids in a way. Yeah, they play fast, and there's an element missing. I'm not the biggest fan of the lyrics. I'm not it's too happy. I like happy music, but it just doesn't sit with me very well. I think, as you'll see, there are other bands more deserving. Next is one I agree with, Journey. Definitely that great debut album, sometimes overlooked. Then you get Look Into the Future and Next, maybe not in that order. Very jazz, fusion, proggy, semi-proggy. I love these two albums. I listen to these all the time. Those first three albums are, to me, a veritable goldmine of music. And not for everyone, of course. I get that. If you don't like it, you don't like it. And then you get into the Steve Perry era, of course, with albums like Infinity, of course. You have Departure, you have the live album Captured, and the wonderful Escape is where the band really cemented its stardom, if you will. And then you get Frontiers, which is amazing as well. I even like Trial by Fire, did a video on that. And then you get into the Panera era. Not exactly my cup of tea. I like some of it, but it's really not something I... Pineda, is that the... I'm butchering his last name, sorry. So anyway, goes to show I don't listen to that era very much. There's some couple good songs on Eclipse, but it's not just that Steve Perry's missing, it's just that there's this lack of resonance. It's almost like going through the motions. But I'm not here to talk about that. That could be a video down the road. But I will concede that Journey definitely does belong in the top 50. They've made their mark on the rock music scene. They're so beloved still today, whether you like the new era or eras or not. Just such a amazing impact. And while a lot of these bands that I don't like and don't believe, or if I do like them, or if I don't think what I'm trying to say is there's some bands here I don't like the Ramones. There's some bands here I like, but I don't think they're deserving of this list, despite their impact. But Journey definitely deserves it, and it's not just because of their impact. So there has to be more than impact for me. There's just something wonderful about the band. Of course, it's the music. Impact be damned. So Journey, for me, definitely belongs in the top 50. I'm not sure if I would leave them here at 46, but that's where they're put by Classic Rock Magazine. Next is Cream at 45. I'm going to disagree with this. Yes, pioneers of hard rock music. I'll agree with Martin Popoff. Looking back and re-listening to Cream over the years, I thought they were heavier, he says, or they're really not that heavy. Their live stuff, those 2 live albums that are split to 2 separate, those are some heavy. Those are very heavy from the era in which they came out, if you will. But there's some pop stuff to it, or lyrically not up to snuff when you have stuff like Sleepy Time, and it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. On one hand, I want to put them in here, but on the other hand, I don't. So I'm taking Cream out. I think there's some other bands that are more deserved to be here. So Cream is out. Motley Crue is number 44, and this is my favorite emoji moment here. This emoji, and it's come to light allegedly. I think it's. I don't even think it's allegedly anymore, but I think this from what I understand, there's some hard evidence to point to the veritable fact, maybe, that Nikki Sixx is Sid Vicious all over again, because on a lot of the tracks, on a lot of the albums, starting with the second album, he's not playing the bass a whole lot. Someone else is playing it. Who knows what the truth is, but even if he is playing the bass, many people have gone on record that his bass playing is very limited. You can hear it on the records if it is him. And it's just a shame that they went off into a different direction after their second album, Shout at the Devil, and they became very commercial, going after the money because of the, getting the ladies to like their music on board with much commercial music. Home Sweet Home. Again, you go from ga 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 to Home Sweet Home. Yes, I can sing. Sorry, thanks. I just don't. 2 good albums. There's a couple songs on Dr. Feelgood, but even to my ears, that's not very good. To be honest, I'd rather put some other hair metal bands than Motley Crue if I was going to put hair metal bands here at all. But Motley Crue, Motley Spew, whatever you want to call them, definitely not deserve to be in the top 50. I don't understand, or rather what I'd like to say is my ears don't understand why they could be in the top 50. But again, it's subjective, and I respect people's opinion, but I definitely wouldn't put them in my top 50. I'm pushing back here. I just don't see the love with Theater of Pain and Girls, Girls, Girls and that sort of thing. Okay, next is Rainbow. I love Rainbow. First 3 albums were phenomenal, with an asterisk. That first album is phenomenal, with the exception of one song, and that is If You Don't Like Rock and Roll. Okay, maybe 2 songs, but they're very Elf-like, but I've warmed up to them a little bit. If You Don't Like Rock and Roll and Snake Charmer are the 2 that I'm thinking of. Snake Charmer is the better of the 2. Black Sheep of the Family might be hailed by many as, a song you shouldn't have done. It's why Blackmore left after Stormbringer, because he wanted to put that on that album, I believe. And I actually like that song, but it's very boogie-esque, Elf-like, but I like it. So even Ronnie James Dio himself said that he thought the first album with Rainbow was better than the second. The second is my favorite. Let's talk about that for a minute. Rising is a masterpiece. Got some epic tracks on side 2, right? Stargazer, Tarot Woman. Just the whole album from start to finish is wonderful. It's amazing. And then you get the third album, Long Live Rock and Roll. I like about 2/3 of it, or maybe half of it. This is definitely a falling off compared to the first 2. The first 2 where it's at. But I do like this trilogy, overall speaking. And then you get into Graham Bonnet. Never cared much for Down to Earth. I'm certainly not the biggest fan of Joe Lynn Turner after the first 2 albums. I'm not a big fan of Bent Out of Shape. The guitar's kind of cool and heavy at times. It just doesn't seem to go with the commercial singing and music in the rest of the musicians, if you will. So there's this too much of a juxtaposition between what Richie's doing and what the rest of the band is doing. But I do like Difficult to Cure, and I love Straight Between the Eyes. That is my favorite Joe Lynn Turner-led Rainbow album. And the stuff after that just doesn't do much for me at all. So I'm taking Rainbow out of this list. I like Rainbow, perhaps top 200, definitely not top 50. Next is Pearl Jam. And this is one of those. These, again, like Motley Crue, although a different sound. I love Pearl Jam's first album. There's a couple great songs on that second album. 1 or 2 songs on Vitalogy, and that's where I jumped off the Pearl Jam train. I go back to listen to stuff when they put out new stuff, and every time I'm disappointed. I just don't see it. But again, I'm just one person, and rightfully so. If you think Pearl Jam deserves to be in the top 50, I respect your opinion. But for me, I just don't think they belong. Again, there are other bands who I think are more deserved. Next is Marillion. I still wanted to love this band, but I don't, and I almost never listen to them. To me, they're still a Genesis wannabe, and I'd rather listen to Genesis. So when I think of Marillion, I think of the British TV show The Young Ones, where Neil is always asking to play Marillion or Hawkwind, right? So Marillion maybe in the top 500. That was 41. Next, number 40 is Status Quo. I like Status Quo, but I'm not the biggest fan of boogie rock. I like some. I like the album Quo. I like quite a bit of their stuff, but I don't like everything from them. But even having said that, there just isn't enough resonance or bite to them. And it doesn't have to be aggressive music, but there's just something missing where I don't think they're deserved to be in the top 50. Anyway, next is 39, Uriah Heep, and totally agree with this. I'm not sure if they deserve to be so low in the 50th ranking, but at least I agree with classic rock on this one. Many people just don't get Uriah Heep, and I respect that as well, but I certainly love them to death. And I'll be doing a video on them soon, saying farewell to them and thank you for being around for so long, that kind of thing, and just, giving us all the great music that they have, even though I don't like everything from them. But so Uriah Heep, 39, good choice. Next is Chicago. I would say they're definitely worthwhile in the top 100, 150, but I don't think they belong in the top 50. Those first 4 albums, all the albums with the original guitar player, Terry Kath, the first 4 just amazing. And then everything after that has Terry Kath on it is still wonderful or close to wonderful. Not necessarily amazing, but those first three, nothing like them. But I would put them lower, somewhere in the top 150. Chicago's a very cool band, especially the Terry Kath era. After that, when they get commercial and love songs and all that, I'm out. Although I do like Stay the Night. That's got a nice heavy guitar solo. Okay, CCR is 37. I like CCR, but again, I don't think they should be this high up. Top 100, top 150, top 200, definitely. Sorry, not here. 36, The Doors. Now we're talking. I think The Doors definitely deserve to be in the top 50, not just because of influence, but because of the music, of course. You have such a presence in Jim Morrison, even when he gained weight, that voice. No one sounds like him. The lyrics sometimes a little less, little more to be, there's more to be desired from the lyrics at times, but overall, what a great debut album. What a great sophomore effort. And then everything after that, through and including L.A. Woman, to me is great or better than great. With the exception of the song, the title track, The Soft Parade, I like the second half of that song. The first half, not so much. But you can count on The Doors having some epic tracks as their closing song, right, in many cases, or two on one album, right? So got to give props to The Doors, number 36. I'm not sure I'd have them at 36, but I do like The Doors in this list. Next is Lynyrd Skynyrd. I would agree with that. Of all the Southern rock bands that we have, Molly Hatchet is one of them. The Outlaws. No one can match. As much as I love Molly Hatchet, and there are days where I'd rather sit and listen to them than Lynyrd Skynyrd, but Lynyrd Skynyrd is and always will be in my eyes, the Southern rock band that reigns supreme. I love the Allman Brothers. They would probably be number 2, but the Southern rock that the Allman Brothers is much different from the Skynyrd and the Hatchet and the Outlaws type of Southern rock. Theirs is, it's hard to describe, but Lynyrd Skynyrd, I definitely agree with at number 35. Number 34 is Slade. I love glam music, glam rock, but I would put Slade in the top 100 or 150 or 200. I do like a lot of their music. I do love their contribution to rock music in general, but I think there are other bands who are more deserved of the spot. Next is Bruce Springsteen at number 33. I get why classic rock would put them here, but I'm not a Bruce Springsteen fan, so I would boot them out. And I would just go on to say that I think, even though I'm not the biggest Springsteen fan, I would say that Bruce Springsteen would be somewhere in the top 100, top 200. Next is Tool. I would put them in the top 200, 250, 300. Used to be a huge Tool fan, but over the years I just haven't been gravitating towards them a lot, if at all. I've kind of outgrown them for some reason, but so Tool, maybe top 200, but not here in the top 50. Next is Fleetwood Mac at number 31. Well, there's some amazing stuff with the original Green, Kerwin, and Spencer lineup. That live stuff, those 3 Boston live albums, Then Play On is phenomenal. I think that's their best album. Then you get the Bob Welch era, which I do like some of that. Bare Trees, I think is quite amazing. They're doing a more California style rock music. I can get into some of that. Mystery to Me is a good album. And then, of course, you get into the Lindsey Buckingham era, which we have those wonderful, 2 of the most amazing albums of all time in the second named Fleetwood Mac album, and then Rumors. And then after that, you get Tusk, which I think could have been a single album, although I do appreciate much of what's there. And then after that, it's just too commercial. So I would not put Fleetwood Mac in the top 50. I would put them in the top 100 or top 200, probably top 100. Nirvana. I think Nirvana is wildly overrated. I like their first album. I like their EP, Bleach. Second album, you have the Pixie-esque punk homage to the punk era or the Pixies with Smells Like Teen Spirit, where you go from heavy to light kind of thing. A good song, but I can't listen to it anymore. There's some songs that are just played out. There aren't too many with me, thank goodness. And then the rest of it's kind of slow and commercial and just drony, if you will. So I just, and that third album, In Utero, there's nothing there for me to like. So I'm booting Nirvana out. I would say they're probably in the top 500 of greatest bands of all time, but definitely not in the upper 10%. Judas Priest, definitely agree here. What a discography with a few sleepers, but from Rock-A-Rolla, which I do like quite. It's a good record, through and including Invisible Shield. There's not much to dislike. So Turbo comes to mind as far as disliking, and most of Firepower doesn't appeal to me. But other than that, Nostradamus, those three, and then but what a discography, right? So yeah, definitely the Metal Gods themselves definitely belong in this list. I'd probably put them. Well, they're one of my top 10 favorite bands, so they would be in the top 10. Next is Genesis. Definitely agree with Genesis. Spot on here, classic rock magazine, going all the way from Trespass through and including Abacab would be their best part of their discography, although Abacab isn't amazing by any stretch. Duke, I'm not a big fan of, so I'd take Duke out. But does Duke come before Abacab? Maybe not. I forget. But anyway, you get my point. Great, one of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time. You have some wonderful albums, some wonderful live material. Great concept piece in The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, one of the greatest concept albums of all time. What's not to like if you're a progressive rock fan? If you like Nursery Crime, if you like Foxtrot, of course, Supper's Ready, they're 2112, right? Oh man, what a great band. Whether we're talking Trick of the Tail, boy, Gabriel leaves, Phil Collins comes in and fills some wonderful shoes, and he does a masterful job. It's like they didn't skip a beat, right? Miss a beat, I mean. All right, Genesis, number 28. Next, 27, Motorhead. I'd put Genesis way ahead of Motorhead, but Motorhead is one of my favorite bands of all time. They would definitely be in my top 50, so I'm keeping Motorhead. How can you not? They are the band that united the punks and the metalheads. All right, next is Foo Fighters. Can't have them in this top 50, maybe the top 500 somewhere. But I'm gonna put artists like Aretha Franklin and Elvis and Jim Croce before the Foo Fighters. And if we're talking about bands and artists, top 500, that kind of thing. So Foo Fighters, that debut album's kind of cool. Has it edginess to it, very quasi-punk, funny lyrics, fingernails are good, right? But then you get the second album, which is their magnum opus. It's wonderful. The third album, Learning to Fly, is the only song I like. It's very boring and dull and goes nowhere. You have One on One, which is great, I think, or nearly great. You have the double album, In Your Honor, which I think is close to being a masterpiece. You have the first disc is mostly heavy, and the second disc is acoustic, very moving and emotive. There's a song that I think is about Kurt Cobain, where he's talking about playing the acoustic guitar with a quarter he found by the phone. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps. That's a masterpiece of an album. And then you get it's got grace and patience in the title with the song that's light and shade. It has Beatlesque moments, and then it gets really heavy. That's See You in the Dark, The Great Pretender. What a great song. But after that, then it gets very dad rockish. So I gotta boot them out of this list. Next is U2. I've not liked U2 in so long. I think they're overrated. I love the War album. I love Achtung Baby. I like parts of the Joshua Tree, but I think that album is overrated. And I'll leave it at that. Bon Jovi is next, and this is another this emoji, whatever this emoji. Are you kidding me emoji, right? Kind of a cool debut album, but like Martin Popoff, the critic, I would agree that I like Runaway, and I stopped listening to pretty much after that, and I never looked back. Something to that effect. Anyway, there was a time I liked the second album, but I listen to it now, I'm like, nope. I definitely don't like... I liked Bon Jovi quite a bit, but I was 15, and then I graduated from that, and too commercial, too pop oriented. Just it's about the ladies. Another band's coming that way in this list that I'm gonna boot out. You see what I'm talking about? So Bon Jovi, no, got to get rid of them out of top 50. I don't see them as one of the top 50th greatest bands of all time. Sorry, no. Next is David Bowie. Now we're talking number 23, excuse me. But David Bowie would be way up in the list. Classic rock. I love your choice in David Bowie. What a discography, with the exception of Never Let Me Down, Black Tie, White Noise, Tonight, and there's one more that's eluding me. Everything Bowie does is gold. Anyway, he had those 4 bad albums back to back to back to back, and then a resurgence, and everything in there is another amazing Bowie run, if you ask me. All right, so David Bowie, definitely thumbs up, number 23. Number 22, definitely agree with this one, Thin Lizzy. What a way to go out with a heavy metal album or near heavy metal album with Thunder and Lightning. Love this album, inspiring Megadeth and Dave Mustaine to do a cover version of Cold Sweat. Jailbreak, their masterpiece. Black Rose is phenomenal. You got Gary Moore on it. Bad Attitude's got only 3 of the guys from the original, the main lineup, because Eric Bell's long gone. But those Eric Bell albums, especially Vagabond of the Western World, what a great album. That is one of my favorite Thin Lizzy albums of all time. Now, the last two albums before Thunder and Lightning is kind of a falling off. There's some good stuff there. I like Snowy White, but Thin Lizzy is, with the exception of the first 2 albums, which I do like some of that, it's really with the third album that you really get the Thin Lizzy you know and love. And so overall, what a great discography. Got to include Thin Lizzy in this list as number 22. I'd probably put him closer, somewhere in the 30s or 40s. But boy, Thin Lizzy definitely deserves to be here. Next is Bob Dylan. I get why they're here, because Dylan is so, from a consensus standpoint, I get Dylan wanting to be in this list. But for me, I'm not a Dylan fan at all. There are other bands. Again, it's all subjective, but Dylan. Got to go, Dylan. Sorry, I'm putting someone in your place. Dylan, definitely top 500 artist of all time. Next is Jimi Hendrix. Only 3 albums, really. Everything else is, posthumously released, that kind of thing. Some great live stuff while he was alive, too. Band of Gypsies is phenomenal. Great live set at the Fillmore. I have to agree with keeping Hendrix in this. Even though he only has 3 albums, really, I got to keep him. It's not just about influence. It's not about impact. It's about only 3 albums, but what a wonderful gift of 3 albums, if that makes it. How do I want to put this? Only 3 albums, but boy, some great 3 albums, right? Okay, that's what I meant to say, I think. Okay, next is Yes. Boy, do they have a wild discography, ups and downs. That first album's not much to my liking. The second one's pretty good. But when you get to the Yes album, through and including Relayer, that's my favorite part. It's a short stint of the Yes that I like. I like parts of Going for the One. I like parts of Big Generator and 90120, but I don't really care for those. They're too commercial and pop. I'll listen to a song here, a song there, kind of like the self-titled Genesis album, right? Or Roll the Bones by Rush, right? Too commercial, but there's 3 really good songs on the album, but kind of that same problem with bands as they age or get into the 80s and that kind of thing. But boy, I got to include Yes. What a great live album, Yes songs. One of the greatest prog rock live albums. One of the greatest live albums of all time. So Yes, definitely. Even though I only really gravitate towards 5, 6, or 7 albums, I got to include them here. Next is the Eagles, number 18. Quick anecdote. I was a huge Eagles fan growing up, thanks to my dad, and I still like the Eagles. Hotel California, a masterpiece. The Long Run, I thought, was always disappointing, although I like some songs there. I do like their early stuff with Bernie Laudon, but I would say Hotel California, One of These Nights, Across the Border, and the first album, just Eagles with Desperado. Those are their best albums. Now, the anecdote is as such. I can't remember the book I was reading, but it was about classic rock, and I don't remember the thesis, but it was years and years ago. But the guy who wrote it did a survey, and he come to find out based on the survey, and you take surveys for what they are. When people think of classic rock, the first band name that pops in their head is Eagles, and to me that's a shame. But as much as I like the Eagles because of my childhood, I won't say that I've graduated from them, because I do listen to them from time to time. They're in my DNA, but they don't deserve to be in the top 50, top 100, top 200, maybe top 300. So Eagles, you're out. Next is Aerosmith. I almost took Aerosmith out of this list, but I love their first album, their debut, as flawed as it is in places, through and including Rock in a Hard Place, although I'm not a big fan of Night in the Ruts. There's a couple songs on Done with Mirrors. That's okay. But after that, Desmond Child destroys the band. Steven Tyler goes along with wanting to do more commercial pop stuff. The band tries to stage a coup, and Steve Tyler somehow avoids it because he reminds them, hey, all the money you're getting. So Aerosmith I'm keeping in the list, but they would probably be in somewhere between, they'd probably be in Roxy Music's spot at 50 perhaps. There's some wonderful stuff there, but all right, next is Kiss. Almost kicked Kiss out, but I'm keeping them in. Too much part of my DNA. One of the first rock bands I ever heard at the young age of 9, third grade. Two of my best friends were talking about them, like, oh, who's that? And, because at that point I'm listening to, a lot of pop stuff like the Beatles and Elvis and Leo Sayer and Boz Scaggs and, and then next thing you know, I got most of the discography up at the time that, whatever year third grade was. But so Kiss I'm keeping because I have a history with them, and I do love everything from that first debut album, despite the fact that the production of the first 3 albums isn't all that good. So the first album through and including, I hate to say this, but Unmasked. I'm not a big fan of, The Elder. I am not the biggest fan of The Elder and Unmasked, but there's like 3 songs or 4 songs on Unmasked I just love, despite it's very poppy, and there are 2 or 3 songs on The Elder that I do love quite a bit, that I listen to all the time. So from the first album through and including The Elder, plus the comeback album that is Creatures of the Night. So that's where I stick to with Kiss for the most part. So Kiss is staying. Van Halen, yeah, I'm keeping Van Halen. And I have reservations about that because for me personally, I only like those first 4 albums and then part of Diver Down. Diver Down was such a disappointment compared to Fair Warning. But I'm keeping Van Halen in the top 50, and it's not just because of the impact or because it's in my DNA, but I have to recognize the genius that is Eddie Van Halen. All right, that was number 15. Number 14 is Def Leppard, and this is one of these moments again. That debut is very unpolished, but like Led Zeppelin's first album, but is quite good. You got some wonderful heavy songs like Wasted and Quasi-Heavy with Hello American, and Rock Brigade is quasi. Those are the 3 best songs. Wasted is my favorite. The single Get Your Rocks Off isn't on that, but, still a good song. That era. Pete Willis, What Could Have Been Right? That second album is their masterpiece, High and Dry. Like the reincarnation of a younger Jimmy Page in so many ways. So heavy, the tone is amazing. And then you get to Pyromania as a falling off, but it's more commercial. But there's still some heaviness and rawness there. And a couple tracks Willis does play on. And it's been documented somewhere. But after that, Hysteria, they go the Bon Jovi route, get way more commercial. They want to appeal to a wider audience, the female demographic. So I'm out after. I don't think they deserve it. I wouldn't even put Def Leppard in the top 300. I just like those 3 albums, and that's it. All right, The Who. I'm not the biggest Who fan, but I'm keeping them because of albums like Quadrophenia. Who's Next? Tommy. And that early stuff, although I'm not the biggest fan of that early British invasion stuff. There is some good stuff there, and I love John Entwistle in that early stuff. That's probably why I listen to the early stuff, because of the bass that I hear coming out of John Entwistle's amp. Again, it's not my favorite. Young Man Blues, what a great song. If only The Who had been more bluesy, heavy like that, with that amazing tone in that guitar for that one song. There was more of that. You have the live album, Live at Leeds, the double version, the Hall, Live at Hall. They play Tommy in its entirety. What else am I missing? Let's see. I'm trying to think now. Not Who by numbers. So there's a couple songs in there I like, but overall, The Who deserves, rightfully so, a place in this list. And not just because of influence, and not just because some of that's in my DNA, but because there's enough music that's powerful and amazing. There needs to be more from the band, but there's enough that I have to keep them in this list. All right. It is possible that another band could come along one day and dethrone them. So they're on the cusp, or they're on the inside looking out, so to speak. But for now, they're in this list. Who Are You? That's the other album I was trying to think of. Okay, next is 12, which is Guns N' Roses, and this is another "Are you kidding me" emoji. I remember some video I did, a guy put, because I said that the I said it was my video where I talked about how I thought, and still to this day, that Guns N' Roses are overrated, and some guy commented, "That's not fair." And I don't understand that kind of criticism of "that's not fair." Fairness has nothing to do with subjective opinions and taste in music. That's not fair would be if I had two children and I loved one more than the other. Or as a teacher, if I had two students do the same rule violation, like say a uniform, and I wrote one up and not the other. That would be unfair. So I don't get the unfair. It's just an opinion. I think they have one good album. Use Your Illusion could have been split up, where they take the good tracks from one and good tracks from two and made it one Use Your Illusion album, and then put out an album of the worst songs from that and call it the worst of Guns N' Roses, kind of like what Jefferson Airplane did, right? You get the Spaghetti Incident, which is downright horrible, although I appreciate the attempt to try to do some covers. That's sometimes a bad sign that a band is on its last leg, is when they start to do covers. Hello, Metallica, right? Garage Incorporated. So I don't get a band with only one really good album, and a lot of us feel that way, is deserved to make in the top 50. Next is Deep Purple. Got to keep them. I'm a huge Deep Purple fan. One of my top 10 favorite bands of all time. Iron Maiden. Got to keep them. That first album, those two albums those two albums with Paul Di'Anno are just phenomenal. Have some heavy metal, but with some funk. I'm sorry, not funk. You have heavy metal, definitely new wave of British heavy metal, but yet you have some punk-like essences in the music as well. There's a punk vibe and feel to those early Iron Maiden albums. And when you listen to Paul Di'Anno sing slower songs like Remember Tomorrow, what a voice. All right, and then the Bruce Dickinson era is the bigger era, of course. And so from the first Paul Di'Anno album, the debut through and including Seventh Son of Seventh Son is where my love of Iron Maiden lies, plus the comeback album Brave New World. Got to keep them in this list. Next is Metallica. I want to give them the boot, but I'm keeping them because of those four albums. Those four albums are so amazing. Like The Who, maybe one day they'll be dethroned, but for now, Metallica stays, but they would be somewhere in 45 through 50 because they just have four good albums, and that's a shame. Next is the Rolling Stones. I got to give credit where credit is due. I am not the biggest Rolling Stones fan, but the era from Beggar's Banquet through and including Tattoo You, that's That's their best era. I'm not the biggest fan of Black and Blue. I'm not the biggest fan of Emotional Rescue. I do like what comes before, much of what comes before Beggar's Banquet, but that's their best run, if you ask me, or much of that is their best run. You take Black and Blue out and Emotional Rescue. All right, so if that makes sense. So keeping Rolling Stones. Next is Black Sabbath. Oh, you betcha. They're one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time. Enough said. Got to keep Black Sabbath. Well, I'll say this. This is where heavy metal began, folks. So I agree with Martin Popoff, the critic, on that front. All right, next is the Beatles. Definitely keeping them here. I'm not the biggest Beatles fan. I was more of a Beatles fan when I was little, but I do still listen to the Beatles quite often. Not every day, not every month, not every year. But I'll get on a kick or a run where I will listen to them. So again, I will not listen to them every year, but I still listen to them often, if that makes sense. Because there'll be a year in my life where I'm listening to them for a long stretch, if that makes sense. So going to keep the Beatles in here. The Beatles I recognize as one of the top 50 greatest bands of all time. I'm not the biggest fan when it comes to pop music in general, but the Beatles, I can gravitate towards that type of pop music, and they're more than just a pop band. All right, AC/DC, I got to keep them. The first album through and including Back in Black. I'm not the biggest fan of Flick of the Switch, not the biggest fan of For Those About to Rock, although that title track is wonderful. Not the biggest fan of Fly on the Wall, but I do like Fly on the Wall better than For Those About to Rock. All right, despite the cheesy song titles and lyrics. All right, next is Pink Floyd. So keeping AC/DC, I'm keeping Pink Floyd. Those first two albums are a little unpolished, but the Syd Barrett era, short and sweet. I wish there would have been more from Syd, unfortunately, but it is what it is. David Gilmour comes in for Saucerful of Secrets, so Syd and Gilmour working side by side, and then the rest is history. So the first album through and including the one after the Wall. Anyway, the title is eluding me. It's kind of like songs taken from A Few More Bricks, which was going to be possibly a follow-up to The Wall. It's kind of a follow-up. Anyway, I can't remember the name. It's got the uniform in the top right. It's got the uniform merits ribbons on the top upper right-hand corner, right? Anyway, so Pink Floyd, you have some wonderful soundtracks, even like More. Well, just shy of wonderful. More and the Zabriskie Point, even though they're not the only band on the soundtrack. There's a double CD you can buy with more songs that didn't make it on the soundtrack that Pink Floyd did. Those are quite good. And then you have Atom Heart Mother, of course, Dark Side of the Moon, through and including The Wall is their best run in the discography. Although I like some of the stuff out of that. As I said, I love the metal album for the most part. So Pink Floyd, got to keep them, the greatest psychedelic rock band of all time. Next is Rush. They're at number 3 on this list of classic rock. They're my favorite band of all time, so I was happy to see them in the third spot. Queen is number 2. I would put them number 2, but I would say Queen, deservedly so, needs to be in this list from the debut through and including News of the World, with a few songs in between that aren't very good in that discography. But overall, that's the best part of the discography. And there's some good stuff that follows, but there's definitely a falling off once you get into outside of News of the World, Hot Space and all that. All right, and number 1 is Led Zeppelin. This is my second favorite band of all time, so I had no problem with classic rock putting Led Zeppelin in the top 50 greatest bands of all time. Bands and artists, as it seems, because you have Dylan and Springsteen as the only artists here. I'm sorry, and Bowie, 3, excuse me. So here are the bands that I would substitute to the ones that I've taken out. I would put Styx in this list. Styx better than Dylan. I listen to Styx more than I listen to Dylan. I don't listen to Dylan much, if at all, although I have some of his stuff on MP3. That first album, very raw, very unpolished. There's a few winners on that debut. It's not a great album, but I like Styx 2 is, I would say, short of phenomenal. Lady is a wonderful song, but there's some other really cool stuff on there. You can see the progressive stuff in the making, some pop stuff, some attempts at heaviness or quasi-heavy, some good stuff on Styx too. The Serpent is Rising. Not a bad album, not a great album. Man of Miracles. We see again Styx moving in the direction that is going to be the era of what we know and love. Equinox. Here is the beginning of the Majesty. Songs like Sweet Madam Blue. This album, for the most part, with the exception of the first song, is great from start to finish. What a wonderful album. And then you get the even more wonderful album in Crystal Ball. An album that is wonderful from start to finish. Tommy Shaw comes on board, right? What an album. What a voice. What an amazing skill set for the guitar. All right, next I'm going to include Kansas. This is an underrated progressive rock band. They are an American progressive rock band. Who knew the violin would work so well with heavy guitars? Especially on the album, the live album Two for the Show. It's amazing. But that first album, that debut, through and including, say, I want to say Monolith. And I do like Monolith, and I do like Audio Visions. I would include them. But the best part of the discography is that debut, Kansas, through and including Point of No Return. I think they definitely belong in the top 50 greatest bands of all time. Next is ELO. Some unpolished raw stuff with their first two albums, but then you get going, and then everything up to and including Time, even the disco stuff you got in Discovery. There's some amazing stuff here. What a voice, very Beatles inspired, of course, but you have the love of classical music combined with pop and rock, and it works. New World Record, my favorite album, and then Out of the Blue, my second favorite. That double album is great. Okay, so ELO I'm including. Next is Triumph. I have to include the other trio Canadian hard rock band. What a guitarist, what a vocalist in Rick Emmett. The shining star of that band, although Gil is great, and so the bass player's name I can never remember, but what a great band. I like everything from that first album through and including Thunder 7, although there's a little falling off with Thunder 7, so I got to include Triumph. Next is UFO. How classic rock didn't include UFO, I'm beside myself with that. The discography, those first two albums, they hadn't found their signature sound yet, but I do like some of that boogie stuff. And then you get that space rock, right? But then you get the Phenomenon album, which is where they really begin to shine through and including Obsession. I'm sorry, I love Obsession. So Phenomenon through and including Making Contact. And I would even include Misdemeanor. The album after that, the EP that has the same similar sound to Misdemeanor, just doesn't work. It's called Ain't Misbehavin'. It's horrible. But the hair metal or hair metal-ish stuff on Misdemeanor actually works. I think even though it's not the original lineup or the classic lineup, but I love UFO. Even Eddie Van Halen at one point wanted to join them, but they told him he had to work it out with Lee Roth. So UFO, one of the greatest British bands of all time. Definitely one of my favorite bands in my top 10. All right, the next band is Sweet. If you're going to put a glam band in the top 50, for me, as I said, it's not Slade. It's got to be Sweet. Influential on the glam movement and glam rock. So Brian Connolly's voice, one of a kind. Everything from starting with Sweet Fanny Adams through and including Give Us a Wink, even though it's a short discography. All right, Scorpions. Boy, does that debut album for me over the last 10 years risen up as one of my favorite debut albums of all time. I heard it when I was 15. I thought it was okay because of Michael Schenker's guitar playing, but now I have to include it in the best part of their discography, the debut through and including Love at First Sting. What a run. 9 albums, right? What a run. All right, got to include Scorpions. Next is Elton John. Putting aside that lackluster first debut album, but the second album, Elton John, through and including Blue Moves. What a run. There's some snooze songs here and there. There's a couple songs I don't like on the last 3 albums in that run, but boy, still, what an amazing album run. Got to include Elton John here. Definitely Elton John is, to me, better than Dylan and Bruce Springsteen. All right. Ian Hunter. Got to include Ian Hunter here. And since I'm on the topic of Ian Hunter and Mott the Hoople are both in my top 50. Mott the Hoople in my top 10 if you look at that video that I made, one of my first videos of all time. Probably one of my first 5 videos of all time for this channel. Ian Hunter, what a great discography. There's songs here and there on his albums that I don't like, but overall, I take that back. With the exception of Short Back and Sides, there's not much for me to like there. But other than that, in his discography, what a discography. What a discography. All right, Mott the Hoople, like Sweet, a short discography, but it is phenomenal. It is amazing. What a great band. What great chemistry they had. I love Mott the Hoople. Okay, next is the punk band The Damned. Debut album through and including Anything, and then the comeback album, Grave Disorder. I love them, even with keyboards and 80s kind of stuff. The saxophone on Phantasmagoria, the pop punkish stuff on Strawberries, the silliness on Strawberries, the last song, it's not the last one, but the song Torture Me. There's some really funny stuff there. And then their cover of Alone Again Or that UFO does also. And then you have the wonderful prog rock punk song Curtain Call, which is amazing live as well. Okay, The Damned. Next is Humble Pie. Humble Pie, Rockin' the Fillmore. That debut is amazing. On a pretty solid discography from that first debut album through and including Smokin'. Not a long discography, but not overtly short like Hendrix or Nirvana. A good discography. After we get into things like Thunderbox. Oh, I like Eat It as well. Eat It is quite good, so I include that as well. So Humble Pie, definitely influencing the Black Crowes and that kind of thing. So definitely Humble Pie in my top 50. Alice Cooper, whether you talk about the band or the artist who, gets the legal work done to make that his name. Very clever of him. Everything from I do love Pretties for You. I do love Easy Action. They're different. It's not the classic 70s stuff that we know and love. The classic stuff, right? But I do love that stuff. There's some Beatlesque feelings of Pretties for You. Psychedelic in places. It's quirky. I love it. It's a little proggy in places, if that makes from an attitude perspective. It's odd, but it's good. Little pop as well. Easy Action's a little bit more in the direction of where they're going to eventually get with Love It to Death. I even love Lace and Whiskey. I even love Flush to Fashion. So, and I love his Steven albums, right? The kid with the haunted past, right? Welcome to My Nightmare 1 and 2, Along Came a Spider, and The Last Temptation, which has a more positive spin because that's where he converted to Christianity. And then the last couple albums, not a big fan of, and I didn't like his new metal stuff. But overall, what a great discography, whether you're talking about the band or the name, the artist. All right, next is Heart. Well, when it comes to their huge discography, I only like their first five albums for the most part, but I have to include them because what a set of lungs Ann Wilson has. What an amazing talent. Too bad she didn't continue with her flute talents. What a great flautist on that first album in Small Spaces, and the second album, I believe, as well. And then her sister, Nancy, what a great guitarist, underrated, whether acoustic or electric. It's too bad the essential main lineup couldn't stay together because of the fighting. You have some comeback out. You have a comeback album with the self-titled Heart, but it's very pop-oriented. But I do like Heavy in Spaces. Bad Animals is okay. But after that, Red Velvet Cadillac or Red Velvet, anyway, that's a decent album. But overall, those first 5 albums are where it's at. I have to include them in my top 50. The next is the Black Crowes. You get a taste of the Rolling Stones. You get a taste of Humble Pie. You get a taste of the Faces. But yet they're still their own band. Everything from that debut, and what a debut it is, through and including Before the Frost. Wonderful stuff. Love the Black Crowes, although I'm not the biggest fan of them that I used to be, in the sense that I'm always listening to them, but I've been thinking about them lately, and I still love them. It's just that I don't love them as much. Well, I love them. I'll leave it at that, but I don't have them, in my top 10 like I used to. That's what I meant to say, because they used to be in my top 10. They're not, but there's definitely, that's why I'm doing this. They're in my top 50 someplace. I'm not sure where. Next is Santana. Those first three albums are their best, let's face it, but you get albums like Caravanserai and some later stuff in the 80s when they're doing the US Festival. There's some really cool stuff there and everything in between. Some great live material like Lotus, what have you. What a great band. Neil Schon or not Neil Schon, right? All right, Nine Inch Nails. I got to put Nine Inch Nails in here. When I first heard Nine Inch Nails for the first time, I was like, oh, this is some cool stuff. I don't like dance music all that much, but you're combining dance and electronica. I don't like electronica that much. I hate Kraftwerk. But you combine that dance, electronica stuff feel with heavy guitars and computer-esque manipulations, but you still have a band. It's not all AI and computers. You have a band. You March of the Pigs, Pinion. You got some heavy metal stuff here as well. Inspiring country artists like Johnny Cash and Soundgarden to do their bits, right? It was fresh when they first came out, and it's still fresh. Even David Bowie wanted to, do, and he worked with Trent Reznor on the Earthling album and then toured with him live. Great band. Those last 3 EPs are wonderful. All right, Blue Oyster Cult. Do I like everything in the discography? Absolutely not. But those first 3 albums are amazing, the black and white period, and then the 4th album is just short of amazing. I want to call that album Sleight of Hand all the time because of the guy on the cover, but now I can't remember the name of the album. But the 4th album got Debbie Denise and Don't Fear the Reaper, and This Ain't the Summer of Love. Agents of Fortune, it's a very good album. And then you have albums like Imaginos, which I like, and you have Fire of Unknown Origin. That's a wonderful album, my second favorite album after Secret Treaties. Revolution by Night, I don't care for. I like parts of Club Ninja. So I got to include Blue Oyster Cult. I think they're a fabulous band, top 50 all the way. Pantera, sounds like Metallica on steroids in spots, to quote Martin Popoff, the critic. And by Pantera, I mean power metal, the first Phil Anselmo album through and including the last album before they broke up. Although that last album, Reinventing the Steel, isn't them at their best. Neither is The Great Southern Tendril, but there's some really good stuff on that. Got to include Pantera, so influential for metal in general, and of course the main reason the music is wonderful. Next is Grand Funk or Grand Funk Railroad. They have some of the best live material out there, and that first album through and including We're an American Band, even Survivor with me there's a bit of a falling off, but it is quite good. So that's a really good discography. I'm sorry, that's a really good album run in their whole discography. Much to be decided with the second half of the discography, but a lot of bands are like that. I'm including Grand Funk. Got to put them here. I love them. Next is Slayer. Now let me explain. Of the big 4 bands, Slayer, Anthrax, Metallica, and Megadeth, Slayer is the only one who, for the most part, stayed with their roots and never veered off into experimentation, or barely any experimentation. If we talk about Anthrax got silly at times, or they are silly at times, with song titles that are backwards. You have lyrics that are silly. You have them doing rap. It's just songs on State of Euphoria, silliness and quirkiness. You're doing some kind of punk shtick with some of their music. Just not my cup of tea. I want them to be raw. I want them to be heavy. I wanted them to, stick to their signature sound. And there was a resurgence with the Worship Music album, which is a wonderful comeback album. This is the Anthrax I know and love. The John Bush era is okay, not a big fan, but Anthrax, just great. Joey Belladonna's voice is amazing. Even the Neil Turbin album, the debut, I like. But once you get into State of Euphoria, there's a falling off, but then there's a bit of a comeback with Persistence of Time. It's not a great album, but it is good. So there's some inconsistencies when it comes to Anthrax. So Anthrax is not in my top 50. Metallica is, I said, but they only have 4 really good albums. Slayer didn't do what Metallica did. They pretty much stick to their roots. There's some experimentation, but not going way off script. All right. So of the big 4, Slayer's the one that pretty much the only one who stayed true to their signature sound. Alice in Chains. Love that debut. Now, I've gone on record saying I am not the biggest fan of the sophomore album. Those first 2 songs, Damn That River and Them Bones, I think are just throwaway songs. They're fluff. They're filler. I love the song Wood. I love the song Down in the Hole. There's Rooster I got tired of. I like maybe 4 songs of the album. But I love those 2 EPs, Sap and especially Jar of Flies. The album with the 3-legged dog, there's like only 3 songs I like on there. But then you get the comeback album, Black Gives Way to Blue. God Put Dinosaurs here. Not as good as that, but decent enough. There's enough in the discography, some great live stuff. There's enough in the discography where I have to put them in this list. All right. I mentioned Metallica already. And so we come to Megadeth. So, Megadeth. If we talk about what is the best part of their discography, their first album, as rough as it is, not as good as Kill 'Em All, through and including, say, Endgame. I like much of what comes after, not all of it. I do like The System Is Broken. I do like Risk. I like parts of it. I don't like much of The World Needs a Hero. I love Euthanasia. I love the 5th album, Countdown to Extinction. I even like Cryptic Writing. So there's a lot in that discography to like. Of course, their magnum opus for many of us is either the second album, Peace Sells But Who's Buying, or Rust in Peace. Mine is Rust in Peace, although those first albums like Metallica are their best 4. So I think that's only 49. So let me do my math real quick. No, that's correct. That's 50. That's 50 artists. So I thought I counted Metallica twice. I did not. So let me review the bands that I kicked out: Roxy Music, ZZ Top, Ramones, Cream, Motley Crue, Rainbow, Pearl Jam, Marillion, Status Quo, Chicago, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Slade, Bruce Springsteen, Tool, Fleetwood Mac, Nirvana, Foo Fighters, U2, Bon Jovi, Bob Dylan, Eagles, Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses. Bands I included took their place: Styx, Kansas, ELO, Triumph, UFO, Sweet, Scorpions, Elton John, Ian Hunter, Mott the Hoople, The Damned, Humble Pie, Alice Cooper, Heart, Black Crowes, Santana, Nine Inch Nails, Blue Oyster Cult, Pantera, Grand Funk Railroad, Slayer, Alice in Chains, and Megadeth. So tell me what you think of this classic rock article, and tell me what you think of my top 50. Thanks so much for watching. God bless. Take care now. Bye.